Today's lecture is on religious minority. Let's begin with the introduction. Religious minority are considered to be a group of people having a faith which is different from that held by the majority. It is now widely accepted that people should have the freedom to choose their own religion, including not having any religion and including the right to convert from one religion to another. However, in many countries, such freedoms are constricted. In this chapter, we shall examine the meaning of religious minority as it has evolved, various approaches adopted in understanding the term, its characteristics and position in international law, especially the United Nations. Then we move on to the issues of religious minority in the case of India. Religious minority, limitation of quantitative criterion. Quantitative criterion of defining religious minority is the most widely followed method of identification of religious minorities. In this perspective, a religious minority is defined as a group lower in numbers which bases its claim for identity on the particularities of its religious convictions. Such a methodology suffers from numerous limitations. First of all, there remains the problem of definition of a religion and of that of an unequal formal or legal recognition of minorities, making it impossible to count their numbers and collect statistics in certain countries. For example, France and Sweden refuse to politically acknowledge the existence of minority. In the case of Denmark, the minority component in its religious acceptation is clustered together with other aspects such as linguistic, socio-economic and even ethnic elements. Greece has not included any questions to record religious minorities since 1951. Therefore, it appears that the count of individuals according to their religious convictions remains approximate, if not non-existent, for minority groups. Another limit for quantitative criterion is the fact that tiny religious numbers can be dominant hegemonic in certain areas. Then the transnational dimension of religious organizations leads to an inability to measure minority religions on a national level. They need rather to be examined worldwide, since some evolve on the basis of a network, the strength of which is difficult to reduce to its mere presence in a country. Finally, often religious minorities are treated also as national minorities without taking into account which is one is less in number or more. This is the case for the Muslim minority, for example, in the case of Greece, or the Catholic minority in Northern Ireland, and for Jewish, Protestant or Catholic minorities settled in many European countries. Next, we move on to the alternative approach in understanding religious minority. Sociologists consider religious minority to be a social construct. In this understanding, a community properly becomes a minority only when it transforms itself from a minority as such into a minority for its own sake. Further, sociologists talk about two types of minority behavior which ultimately influences state action. The first type, that is the great dominant minorities, seeks to avoid any strong community sentiment leading to rallying of the numbers of dominated community liable to endanger their privileges. This type of minority hopes that their strategy will enable them to benefit from equality of opportunity bound up with their integration. This is the case for the Jewish and Protestant communities in France. The second type, that is small minorities, is the one which have in the past undergone persecutions or discriminations. Minorities permanently dominated over and discriminated against cannot hope to benefit from the advantages of social integration and therefore tend to display their differences. They may even go far is to claim positive discriminative measures and advocate a model of multicultural integration or rather non-integration. United Nations and the rights of the religious minority. Since its establishment in 1945, the United Nations has given emphasis to protect the rights of the minorities. A special subcommittee on the protection of minority rights appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Commission in 1946 defined the minority as those non-dominant groups in a population which possesses a wish to preserve stable ethnic, religious and linguistic traditions or characteristics markedly different from those of the rest of the population. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 and its two international covenants of 1966 declared that all human beings are equal in dignity and rights and prohibit all kinds of discrimination, either racial or religious, etc. Essential treaty norms for the protection of minority rights are found in particular under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which we call ICCPR, and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, that is CRC. Article 18 of ICCPR states that everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion, and freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs may be subject to limitations to protect public safety, order, health or morals of the fundamental rights and the freedom of others. Article 27 of ICCPR further focuses on the right of the group to be recognized as religious minority and are entitled to establishment and maintenance of religious institutions and schools, the protection of religious rights and holy places. Further, Article 30 of the CRC stipulates that a child belonging to a minority or who is indigenous shall not be denied the right in community with other members of his or her group to enjoy his or her own culture, to profess and practice his or her own religion or to use this his or her own language. The United Nations Declaration against all forms of religious discrimination and intolerance of 1981 outlaws all kinds of religion-based discrimination. In addition, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Persons belonging to national or ethnic, religious and linguistic minorities, which we also call Minorities Declaration of 1992, enjoins states amongst others to create favorable conditions to enable minorities to express their characteristics and develop their culture, language, religion, tradition and customs. In 1986, the United Nations Commission on Human Rights appointed a special rapporteur on religious intolerance. In the year 2000, the Commission on Human Rights changed the mandate title to Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief. Appointment of the Special Rapporteur was necessitated by the fact that systematic discrimination and exclusion against religious minorities continues to exist. This was corroborated by the report submitted to the United Nations Human Rights Council on December 24, 2012 by Mr. Hannah Bilfet, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief. The report highlighted that human rights violations against persons belonging to religious minorities include disproportionate bureaucratic restrictions, denial of appropriate legal status positions, systematic discrimination and a partial exclusion from important sectors of society and discriminatory rules within family laws. It concluded with a list of recommendations for protecting and promoting the freedom of religion or belief of persons belonging to religious minorities. Religious minorities in India. India is a secular country. It has no state religion and there is equal respect for and protection to all religions. Religious minorities are defined at the national level. Religious minority in India is defined as all those who profess a religion other than Hinduism, since more than 80% of the country's population profess the Hindu religion. On October 23, 1993, the central government notified the Muslim, Christian, Sikh and Buddhist and Parsi communities to be regarded as minorities. According to the Census of India 2001, Muslims are the largest minority, followed by the Christians, Sikhs and others. Right of the religious minorities in India. Article 15 and 16 of the Indian Constitution prohibit the state from making any discrimination on the grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, descent, place of birth, residence, or any of them either generally. However, the provisions of these two articles do take adequate cognizance of the fact that there had been a wide disparity in the social and educational status of different sections of a largely caste-based, tradition-bound society with large-scale poverty and illiteracy. Therefore, the Constitution permits positive discrimination in favor of the weak, the disadvantaged, and the backward. Other constitutional safeguards. The other measures of protection and safeguard provided by the Constitution in Part 3 or elsewhere having a bearing on the status and the rights of the religious minorities are: first, freedom of conscience and freedom to profess and practice and propagation of religion, that's under Article 25. Second is freedom to manage religious affairs under Article 26. Third is freedom as to payment of taxes for promotion of any particular religion under Article 27. Next, freedom as to attendance at religious institution or religious worship in certain educational institutions under Article 28. Article 29 and 30 deal with cultural and educational rights of minorities. The scope of Article 29 is not necessarily confined to minorities. However, Article 29 guarantees the minorities, whether based on religion or language, to preserve and propagate their religious, cultural and linguistic identity and heritage. Article 30 is a minority-specific provision that protects the right of minorities to establish and administer educational institutions. Article 30 was incorporated in the Constitution with the intention of instilling confidence among minorities against any legislative or executive encroachment on their right to establish and administer educational institutions. Legal framework for protection of religious minorities. Protection of Civil Rights Act 1955 and the Scheduled Caste and the Scheduled Tribe Act 1989 have been enacted to protect persons belonging to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes from untouchability, discrimination, humiliation, etc. Protection of Civil Rights Act 1955 is applicable across the board to all cases of untouchability related offences regardless of religion. With a view to evaluating progress and development of minorities, monitoring the working of safeguards provided to them under the Constitution and laws, etc., a non-statutory Minorities Commission was constituted in 1978. In 1992, the National Commission for Minorities was enacted to provide for constitution of a statutory commission. A constitution amendment bill such as the Constitution 103rd Amendment Bill 2004 was introduced to add a new article, that's Article 340A, to constitute a National Commission for Minorities with a constitutional status. Issues surrounding religious minorities in India. Religious minorities face several problems in India. One basic issue is that the minorities are not able to integrate properly in the Hindu-dominated society. The minorities claim that, unlike their Hindu counterparts, they are relatively deprived in areas like employment, politics, and social facilitation. According to them, they are poorly represented in public services such as administration, medical and engineering colleges, etc. Second is the issue of emergence of distinct identity movement based on religion. Khalistan movement for the Sikhs and the self-determination movement by Islamic organization in Kashmir are two prominent examples. In both cases, gross violations of human rights and loss of human lives have occurred. Conclusion. There is no universally accepted definition of religious minorities. Each country adopts different yardsticks and approaches in order to attain to the needs of such categories of people. In many European countries, religious minorities are either clubbed within the category of national minority of migrants. However, statistical approach, in spite of suffering from many limitations, is popularly adopted in addressing the grievances of such minorities. Right from the inception, the United Nations has addressed the issue of religious minorities and recommends safeguards to member states to protect the human rights. The latest instance being the institution of a special rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief to specially look into the problem faced by the religious minorities across the globe. As far as India is concerned, vexing issues haunt the life world of the religious minorities in the country. The religious minorities have to be empowered educationally and economically. The progress of the country can be achieved if all the religious communities in India live in perfect harmony. Thank you.